Okay, guys, so does everybody have the reader open?
Yes.
Okay, so what we're going to do first, if you remember before when we were going over the objectives, we said that we were going to look at the headings in our reader for our reading assignment, and we were going to make questions out of those headings. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Just predict what we're going to read about. So what I want you guys to do first is just to look at the different headings that you see in the reader before we read everything, okay? So if you go down to page number 4 and 5, I see a header right here. Can you guys see where I'm pointing?
Yes.
And it says what?
America. Migrating to America.
Migrating to America, right? So that's one header that we have. So what I want you to do is just look on your own for about 1 minute, and I want you to look at the other headers that are in our reader. And you only have to go as far as page 11, okay?
Okay.
So just look at what the other headers are, and then I'm going to ask for you to give me those headers, and we're going to put them in our graphic organizer, okay?
Okay.
So I'm going to give you about 1 minute just to look silently, and then I'll ask you guys to respond. Okay, just a couple more seconds. Okay, are we ready?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to go over to the graphic organizer. You guys can stay on the screen that you have open for the reader if you want. But you can see here that I already filled in the first header, Migrating to America. So what would be some other headers that came after that one? And we could go to the next box and we could put that one in there.
Oh, I have one.
Okay, go ahead, Juanita.
Entering Ellis Island.
Entering. Okay. Entering Ellis Island is the next header. Okay, what would be the next one? Byron, did you say you had one?
Yes, excluded the drained world.
Excluded the dreaded. What does that mean, the dreaded word? Kind of something you don't want. Exactly. Yeah. Okay, and what would be the next one? Valeria, did you find the next one?
Migrating to America.
That was the first one.
Oh, I have it.
And then on the next pages, we had entering Ellis Island, then excluded the dreaded word.
Oh, I have it.
Okay.
Desperate to live a better life.
Desperate to live a better life. Okay, good. So now we've got all of our headers. So now what I want to do, let's see if I can move this up just a little bit, try to get it all on one page. I want to turn these into questions so that we can predict what each of the sections is going to be about. So for example, the first header was Migrating to America. And I have that written into my graphic organizer. So if I were to turn this into a question to predict what would be answered in that section of the text that we'll be reading, and there could be more than one possible answer. This could answer a lot of questions for us. But just as an example, one question I might ask would be, who migrated to America, right? Oops. Do you guys think that might be a question that section of the book will tell us?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so that's one question. Why don't you guys take just a couple of minutes and see if you can think of another question that we could ask that might be answered in the text for migrating to America. So I started you out with the first one. Why don't you guys see if you can write down one other question that you think might be answered in the book?
Do we write it on the...
You can write it on there if you want to. If you can't write it on the spreadsheet, then you can write it on paper.
Can we write more than one or just one?
You can write more than one if you have another question. I'll give you about one more minute. Okay, it looks like you're finished writing. Are we done?
Yeah.
Okay, you guys did a great job on this. So we have my first question, who migrated to America, that we think might be answered. Then somebody wrote, when are they migrating? Or should we make that past tense? When did they? Right? When did they migrate to America? So do we all agree that we might find the answer to that in the text?
Yes.
Okay. How can they migrate to America? Or who wrote that one?
Me.
So do we mean like how did they migrate?
Yeah.
Okay. And where were they from when they migrated to America? These are all great questions, guys. And then finally, why? Why did they migrate to America?
It's like the 5 W's.
It is. Or it looks like we got 4 W's and an H, right?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so what I want you guys to do now is see if you can do that for the rest of the headers that we have. Why don't I give one of these to each of you to come up with some questions, and then we'll go over all of them together. So Juanita, since you gave me this header, entering Ellis Island, why don't you see if you can come up with 1 or 2 questions for that header?
Yeah.
Byron, excluded the dreaded word. See if you can come up with 1 or 2 questions for that section.
Okay.
And then Valeria, desperate to live a better life. And there really aren't wrong answers here, because even if the question isn't answered in what we're going to be reading, we're kind of getting our brains flowing, right? We're thinking about what the sections might be about and what kind of information we might find. So I'll give you guys about 3 minutes to do this. Okay.
I can't think of any more.
Okay. Byron, you done?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So Juanita, why don't you read us your questions that you put in for entering Ellis Island?
Okay. Number 1, how did they enter Ellis Island? Number 2, when did they enter Ellis Island? Number 3, where did they live before they entered Ellis Island?
Okay. Good job. Anybody else have another question or a way that we could turn the header into a question that they think might be more information we might get from that section?
I want.
Sorry, Valeria, what'd you say?
Can I say one?
Yes.
Why did they enter Ellis Island?
Okay. Any others? Okay, Byron, your section was excluded, the dreaded word. What were your questions?
Number 1, why did they not want to get excluded?
And the next one?
Number 2, who did not want to get excluded?
Okay. So who didn't want to be excluded and why did they not want to be excluded, right?
Yep.
Okay. Any other questions? Any other suggestions for this section? Okay, Valeria, your section, desperate to live a better life.
How can they live a better life? Why do they want to live a better life? Where will they live a better life?
Okay, excellent. Any other suggestions for that section or questions you would like to see answered?
No.
Okay.
Who is desperate?
Sorry?
Who is desperate to live a better life?
Okay, we can add that one. Okay, are we happy with that?
Yeah.
We have a lot of questions that we hope will be answered when we start reading, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go back to our reader, and I'm actually going to read the first section, and I want you guys just to follow along while I read, okay? And as I read, listen for information to some of the questions that we've put into our graphic organizer. It doesn't matter if all of the information is there, but we're just going to listen to see if some of those questions are answered in this section, okay? But, and you can take notes if you want to, but don't write anything into the graphic organizer until after I finish reading, okay?
Okay.
But if you want to write notes on your own while I read, that's okay. Okay?
Okay.
Okay, so is everybody on pages 4 and 5?
Yes.
Okay, remember, if you can't see it very well on your screen, you can look on my screen while I read. Okay, so migrating to America. Imagine living in an overcrowded country. There are few jobs and many people are poor and without hope. Some are even harassed because of their beliefs. Hunger and desperation are everywhere. Wars abound. This was the case during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. So, millions of people migrated to the United States. They came from around the world. At no other time in history have so many people flocked to one nation. I'm just kind of wondering to myself here, it says they came from around the world. So I'm wondering if we're going to find out where they came from, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to keep reading. America was seen as the land of opportunity. Europe was overcrowded. The people in Europe heard there were jobs and lots of land for farms across the ocean. People left behind everything to come to the United States. Often, they sold all they owned to buy tickets. This made their choice irrevocable. Huge crowds of people entered the United States daily. They hoped to get jobs and own homes. They wanted to worship in their own ways and live happy lives. Many had their hopes fulfilled. Others were not so lucky. And then down here, as a caption to this picture, it says, immigrants arriving in the United States wait in line at Ellis Island. That looks like a pretty long line.
Yeah.
What do you guys think? And then this over here, this caption to this picture says, this is a ship ticket that was used to bring someone to the United States. And then the captions over here in the margin says the invitation. In 1883, Emma Lazarus wrote a poem that is now displayed on the Statue of Liberty's base. It reflects what was happening at that time. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, the tempest toast to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Prior to 1820, no one kept immigration records. In the 1840s, about 100,000 people came to the United States each year. By 1854, that figure had quadrupled. Who knows what quadrupled means?
4 times.
4 times. So 4 times that many, right? By 1860, 4 million immigrants had already entered the nation. And this was before the Great Migration years of 1900 to 1930. Okay, so we can go back and forth, but let's go back to our graphic organizer and see if we can figure out the answers, if we found some of the answers to our questions. Did we find out the answer to the first question, who migrated to America?
No. Oh, yes? Wait. Yes.
What do you think, Valeria?
People that didn't have a job.
Okay.
I have one, Miss Curry.
Okay. So I'm going to put people who didn't have jobs migrated. Byron, you said you had one?
Yeah, Europe.
Where they came from?
No, I don't know. Oh, I have one for why did they migrate to America?
Okay, let's go back to what Byron said. Byron, you said Europe. Is that answering the question of where they came from?
Yes.
Okay.
The people in Europe heard there were jobs and lots of lands for farms across the ocean. People left behind everything to come to the United States.
Right. So people who didn't have jobs or money, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, oops.
They wanted to have a better life.
Because they wanted a better life, right? And then, Byron, you said many immigrants came from Europe, right?
I have one.
Okay, Valeria.
On why did they migrate to America? Because they didn't have a job and they wanted a better life.
Okay. Do you think that what we put here, does that answer that? People who didn't have jobs or money migrated because they wanted a better life?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. What about how? How did they migrate to America? Did it tell us that?
They bought everything. They sold all the things they owned to buy tickets.
What kind of tickets? Do we know?
Helicopters. Airplanes.
Did it say that?
No. A ship ticket. A ship. Yeah.
Oh, that's right. I remember when we looked at that picture, it showed us a ship ticket, right?
Yeah.
We got to remember this was 100 years ago, so people were not flying planes as much as we do today.
Or driving cars. Yeah.
So do we think that answers most of our questions for that first section?
Yeah.
Who migrated to America? People who didn't have jobs or money migrated because they wanted a better life. How did they migrate? They sold everything they had to buy ship tickets. So they came by ship. Where were they from? Many immigrants came from Europe. And why did they migrate? That's in the first one we wrote, right?
Yes. Oh, there's one. So for the one that says when did they migrate to America? Yeah.
Oh,
America.
when? I skipped one. You're right. When?
Here it also says by 1860, 4 million immigrants had already entered the nation.
Did it say 1860?
Yeah. Where? On population explosion.
Did more immigrants come later, did it say?
Yes, it did.
And what time period was that?
I have one. 1820.
When was that, Byron?
1820s. The 1820s.
But after 1860, so we already have by 1860, millions of immigrants had already entered the nation. Were there more that came even after that?
1900 to 1930. On 1980, no. 1900 to 1930. 1854.
So does that kind of summarize it? If we say by 1860, millions of immigrants had already entered the nation. More immigrants came from 1900 to 1930.
Yeah, also in 1840. 100,000 people came to the United States each year.
So if I added that, many immigrants came beginning in 1840. By 1860, millions of immigrants had already entered, and more immigrants came from 1900 to 1930.
Mm-hmm.
Do we like that?
Yeah.
Okay. So now I want you guys to do that with the next section. So what I'm going to have you do is read to yourselves silently the section called Entering Ellis Island. Be sure to read any of the captions to the pictures and any of the graphics that are on here so you can make sure you're getting all the information. But basically, you're going to read everything on pages 6 and 7 that you see right here. And then I'm going to let you guys work together to come up with, to see if we answered our questions that we put for that section, Entering Ellis Island. Does that sound good?
Yes.
So I'll give you about 5 minutes to read. I don't want you to go in and write anything yet until we all come back together, and then we can all discuss as a group. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to set my timer for about 5 minutes. If you're finished before 5 minutes are up, go ahead and just say finish so I know that you're done.
I'm not.
Okay. All right, so if we go back to our graphic organizer, why don't the three of you discuss now as a group if we have answers to the questions that we put here? How did they enter Ellis Island? When did they enter Ellis Island? Where did they live before they came to Ellis Island, and why did they enter Ellis Island? So see how many answers you got from your reading that you can put into the right-hand column of our graphic organizer. And you guys can go ahead and type in the answers if you'd like.
I think I know the one for why did they enter Ellis Island.
What's your answer, Valeria?
Probably because it says that there was doctors there that inspected people to see if they were sick. So I think it's because of that.
Okay. So maybe we could say something like Ellis Island was a place where people could see doctors before entering the country. Would that be kind of what you were saying, Valeria?
Yeah. Miss Clary.
Yes.
I think I have one where they how did they I don't think it's good, but where it says how did they enter Ellis Island?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's where it says 8 million immigrants came through Castle Island, a huge round stone fort of New York City.
Oh, okay. So before Ellis Island, there was a different place that they had to go through.
Castle. Oh, what I said was wrong because it said that they had to pass medical and oral tests in order to pass.
Right. What do they mean by oral tests?
Miss Clary, was that one right?
Yes. That was one piece of information that we got. But what did they mean by they had to have medical tests and oral tests? What do you think they mean by oral tests?
To see if they were ill.
Okay.
Or had spent time in jail.
Yes, there was that as well. So what were they doing to find out that information?
They were asked to give their names.
Right, they were asking them a lot of questions, right? First, before Ellis Island. What other questions were answered here? What about when? When did they enter Ellis Island? When did people start going through Ellis Island?
Oh, in 1892, because it owned it.
Okay.
Oh wait, no, it says more than 27 million immigrants entered the United States between 1870 and 1916. Yeah.
Entered the United States, but what about Ellis Island? When did they start coming to Ellis Island?
In 1890.
Yeah, good. So we can write many immigrants came to the U.S. from, what did we say, 1870 to 1916? Immigrants began going through, Ellis Island in, what was that year again?
1892.
1892. Okay, entered Ellis Island. Did we find out information in this section?
No.
It didn't really talk as much about the reasons why, did it? But we did get some indication in the last section, right? Okay, so do you guys think you can do the next two sections on your own?
Yes.
So you're going to read, let me bring this back over.
Desperate to live a better life.
There's one section before that.
excluded the dreaded word.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do we do both though?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Do you guys want to do it one at a time, or do you want to do both?
Both.
Both together?
Yeah.
Okay. So you're going to read pages 8 and 9, excluded the dreaded word, and look for answers to the questions that we made from our headings. And then finally, desperate to live a better life. So this time, if you want, you can go ahead and put the questions in on your own, okay? You can type them in on your own, or you can write them down on a piece of paper and we can add them later. But we'll come back together when you guys are done with both sections, and we'll see if our questions were answered. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
I'll give you guys it didn't take you long to read last time, so let's do 8 minutes total for both sections, okay?
Okay.
Okay, are we about ready to go over what we've put?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Juanita, you still there?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's go over what we put for excluded, the dreaded word. Did we get our questions answered?
Yes.
So who didn't want to get excluded?
The Irish and African people.
Okay.
Wait, no. The immigrants did not want to get excluded.
So all the immigrants didn't want to get excluded, right?
Yes.
And what did we say excluded meant? Excluded means you're left out, right? So what were some of the reasons they didn't want to get left out or didn't want to be excluded?
Can I say?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Because they did not want to get split because they were gonna get their family split.
Oh, they were going to split their families apart.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you think we could maybe combine these ideas? Because I think you guys all kind of focused on the same answer, which is great. So you all got the same information from the text. But what if we change it to just put the immigrants did not want to get excluded from entering the U.S. because they would get separated from family.
Yeah.
And then these kind of repeat the same idea, don't they?
Yeah.
Were there any other reasons that you read as to why they didn't want to get excluded or why they wanted so badly to get into the United States?
Because they were in need, they didn't have a law of, and they were slaves to other people.
What did you say first, Byron?
Because they didn't have a law of things like food and.
Okay. That might be in, let me see, let me go back to. Oh, I remember there was a vocabulary word in here that reminds me of a pretty big reason why some people came. Let's see. Was there any other information from this section excluded the dreaded word? anything else interesting that you all found? Maybe if it wasn't an answer to a question?
Oh, the ruler of some people would not let men leave the country. So some Chinese men had to sneak aboard ships.
Okay. Was that in the excluded section?
And desperate to live a better life.
Okay. Let's go to that section then. So desperate to live a better life. So why they wanted to live a better life, you said?
Because they were enslaved and poor.
Okay. Let's move that to... So they, who are they? The
And African people.
Okay. So if we put many immigrants were enslaved and poor, they want to have a better life because some people are poor and their main food source was only potatoes. Oh, what was that vocabulary word for when there's a shortage of food?
Meager.
They had meager possessions, or there was when there's no food, it's called a famine. Yes. So what if we say they wanted to have a better life?
Because some people were famine.
How about if we say some people were poor and there was a famine in their country? So does this kind of repeat the same idea here?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, and then we put Irish and African people by moving out of the country. Can we make that a complete sentence?
Irish and African people were enslaved and poor.
Okay. What if we combine these two ideas? What if we say many immigrants like the Irish and African people were enslaved and poor? And then someone said something earlier about the Chinese that immigrated. Is that right?
Oh yeah, the ruler did not the ruler would not let the men leave the country, so the Chinese men had to sneak aboard ships. But if they were caught, they were faced to death. That is scary.
So some immigrants had to sneak away because their rulers did not allow. You want to finish that for me? Did not allow what?
Men leave the country.
Did not allow them to leave
the country.
the country.
Yeah, but only men.
Okay, any other information we got from that section?
Yeah.
Okay.
Why do they want to live? How can they live a better life?
Mm-hmm.
By leaving the country. You have to leave the country.
So the immigrants wanted to live a better life by leaving their countries and would it be immigrate or emigrate? Immigrate to the U.S. and immigrating. Okay. So do we think we got answers to most of our questions? Let's go back and look. So in the first section, we had migrating to America. And we learned that who immigrated? People who didn't have jobs or money migrated because they wanted a better life. Many immigrants came from Europe. Did we learn in other sections that they came from other places besides Europe?
I think so. I think so.
Well, we just talked about one other place. Besides Europe, they also came from what other country that we just talked about?
America.
That's where they're coming to. Where were they coming from? We just talked about it.
What about Irish, I say?
Where they had the ruler who wouldn't let them leave.
Oh, that one. Oh. They were from
China, right? So many immigrants came from Europe and from China. They sold everything that they had to buy ship tickets.
That's sad.
Yeah. When did they come? They came beginning in 1840. By 1860, millions of immigrants had already entered the nation, and many more immigrants came between 1900 and 1930. And then we learned about Ellis Island, right? And we knew that Ellis Island was a place where immigrants could see doctors and answer questions before entering the country. They went through Castle Island before Ellis Island was open, right? And many immigrants came to the U.S. between 1870 to 1916, and immigrants began going through Ellis Island in 1892. And then in the next section, we learned that the immigrants didn't want to get excluded from entering the country because they were afraid they would get separated from their families. And then finally, in the last section that we read, we learned that many immigrants, like the Irish, had a famine. They didn't have any food, or they were poor. And some of the African people, we learned, were enslaved. And they wanted to live a better life by coming to the country. And even some had to sneak away, like some immigrants from China, because their rulers were not allowing them to leave their country. Right?
Yes.
You guys did a good job. So do you think that this would be a good strategy for when you're reading? Is to look at the headers of what you're going to be reading and then maybe think of some questions that you can ask beforehand. And then while you're reading, see if the questions that you asked are answered in the text, right? You already kind of have an idea. You have a prediction about the information that you're going to see in the text. And then you're reading to try to find that information. Do you guys like this strategy? And I just want to make sure that we got all of our objectives taken care of in this lesson that we did. Can everybody see that? The content and language objectives that we went over before?
Yes.
Okay, so let's see if we met our objectives for the lesson. We will identify the reasons for massive immigration to the United States in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Did we identify those reasons that there were so many immigrants?
Yes.
We will describe the Sorry?
They're black.
We will describe the challenges many immigrants faced when they arrived in the United States. Do you think we learned about the challenges that the immigrants faced when they arrived?
Yeah.
Okay.
Miss Clary?
Yes.
Some people also had to pass medical and oral states, and if they were ill, the inspectors will reject them.
That's right. We did talk about that too, right? They were worried that they might get excluded for medical reasons or for other reasons when they questioned them, right? Okay, so for the language objectives, did we predict what we were going to learn by turning our headings into questions?
Yeah.
I'm with you there. So then that leads to the last one. So our language objective, did we read to understand the reasons for immigration and the challenges immigrants face? So did we learn all of that in our reading?
Yes.
We did. You guys did an excellent job.